Thinking of renting in Portugal? Check out these top 10 tips to ensure you get the property you've always dreamed about rather than a nightmare that you can't wake up from. Well, I'm a big believer in the long-term benefits of property ownership. Sometimes it makes sense to rent, especially if you're not sure if you're going to live somewhere for more than 3 years. So let's dive into the basics of renting in Portugal while we check out Lisbon's oldest bairro, Alfama, as well as Castelo São Jorge in the Castelo bairro. When many people think of Lisbon, they think of narrow streets, small praças, winding hills, fado music, old churches, and castles. Now, Lisbon has come a long way, but Alfama has a firm grip on the nostalgia of a bygone era, or shall I say many, many eras. See, when the Moors ran things, that was the 8th century, so a long time ago, Alfama was Lisbon. It was the whole town. It was primarily inhabited by fishermen and the less fortunate. It's now home to very old properties, historic landmarks, a ton of ales, which is short for alojamento locais or Airbnbs. There's so many Airbnbs here, the city put a moratorium on new licenses. You can transfer a license upon sale, but you can't get a new one, at least as of right now, August 2025. But we're not here to talk about short-term rentals. We're here to talk about finding you a long-term rental. You don't necessarily need to hire a real estate agent to find a rental, especially if you're familiar with the different neighborhoods and you have a lot of time and patience to navigate the process using the consumer portals. But if you're a busy professional, or maybe you've not yet moved to Portugal, or maybe you need someone to help you remote, hiring an agent can make all the difference in the world and help you avoid scams or other costly mistakes. You see, a high-quality real estate agent will provide additional services other than just search. We qualify every property ahead of time to make sure it's available and it meets all of your requirements. We'll handle the offer and the negotiations, and we'll facilitate the creation of the lease. We'll also provide legal review to ensure your rights are protected and they're clearly stated in the documentation. We can even help you set up your utilities so everything is working when you get here, including your electricity, gas, water, internet, and even your cell phones. Me and my team, we can help you with all this, so feel free to send me a message. My contact info is in the notes below. Now, the best place to start with your search is on the consumer portals like Idealista. Most of the rental listings will be found there, with just a few exceptions, like if the property's not on the market yet or if it's being quietly marketed, you may only find it on the brokerage sites like ours at kwportugal.pt. I recommend starting the rental search about 6 weeks before you need the lease in hand. It will take a couple of weeks to search, tour, and select the property, and then maybe another 7 to 14 days to actually finalize the lease to make it official. It's not a very fast process. So that gives you a 2-week buffer just in case you're not finding what you need and what you like right away. If you're going to hire an agent, it's probably best to engage about 2 weeks before then so we can properly plan and make sure there's capacity in our schedule. So in an optimal situation, you should probably hire an agent about 8 weeks or so before you need to have your lease in hand. So let's check out Castelo de São Jorge, one of Lisbon's most iconic landmarks. Perched high above the city on one of the largest hills in Old Lisbon, dates back at least in part to the 2nd century BC, with artifacts reaching back as far as 1200 BC. It didn't become much of a fortress until the 8th century under Muslim rule. In 1147, the soon-to-be king at the time, Afonso Henriques, seized the castle, which was a major milestone in the Crusades to create the Kingdom of Portugal. So most of what you see today was from its reconstruction under Salazar in the 40s and again under the new government in the 90s. Now, let's talk about the lease itself. Leases vary from their duration. The most common lease term we see is 3 years. Every now and then we'll see a 1-year lease or a 5-year lease. Now, a 3 or 5-year lease may sound like a long time, but the lease term and the amount of time you're committed to paying rent are not the same thing. Let me explain. So tenants can exit a lease early, provided they have fulfilled 1/3 of the lease and then given 4 months notice. So a 1-year lease is actually an 8-month commitment. Here's the math. 1/3 of 12 months, 4 months, plus 4 months notice makes an 8-month commitment. A 2-year lease is actually a 1-year commitment. 24 months divided by 3, 8 months plus 4 months notice is 12 months. And a 3-year lease is a 16-month commitment. A 5-year lease means you're committed for 2 years. So this commitment period is the amount of time you're required to stay before you have a right to exit the lease, provided you give notice 4 months in advance. So if you're wondering how this long lease commitment became a thing, well, it's because the landlord is able to save a whole lot more in taxes for a 5-year lease versus a lease with a shorter duration. See, the landlord pays 28% tax on a 1-year lease, 26% on 2 to 5 years, 24% on 5 to 10. So it just keeps stepping down. So the landlord is incentivized to grant longer lease periods, which offer more protection for the tenant, but it also obligates you for a longer commitment. And if you're really curious to know, the tax rate drops to 14% for 10 to 20-year lease and only 10% for a 20-year lease or longer. Deposits work very similarly as they do in the US. As long as you don't wreck the place, you should get your deposit back in full, less any damage or repairs needed. The maximum allowed by law deposit is 2 months. Although we see landlords break this all the time, we usually push back if their ask is excessive, but sometimes landlords just don't budge. Now, we often see 2 months of prepaid rent due at the time of lease signing as well. Rent is paid in advance, usually 1 month prior, so a November rent payment would actually be to cover the January rent. I saw a 2-month payment period recently, which means your November payment would actually be for February. That one made my head hurt. It seems overly complicated, especially for Americans, but that's the way they do it here. So this is really to protect the landlord in case you stop paying. They have a month or two of buffer. So speaking of protections, what protections does the government provide the renters in Portugal? Now, coming from San Francisco, where tenants' rights are extraordinarily strong, Portugal is perhaps slightly less so. Rent control exists and is based on a cost of living index. This year, 2025, rents were allowed to increase 2.16%, and that can happen while your lease is in place. But once your lease expires, your landlord is allowed to ask for any increase they feel they can get. Remember, your lease does not guarantee you a fixed rent, but it does grant you a fairly secure place to live. Evictions are very difficult in Portugal, but if you're a bad tenant and you're not paying rent on time, don't count on staying. However, the landlord may be able to evict during the lease period if they or their family member needs to move in. So it gets complicated if you're in that situation, consult an attorney. Sometimes you'll see guarantor required on the listing. This comes up with foreign renters a lot, renting from Portuguese landlords who are especially risk averse, or maybe they had a bad experience in the past. So a guarantor is someone in Portugal that will pay in case you don't. They have to sign a document and are essentially on the hook. So if you don't have anyone in Portugal yet that would be willing to do that, a bank can be your guarantor, but they usually require the full payment of the guarantee be held in a special account. I don't love this option, but it is a solution for folks in a pinch. To get more tips like these and exclusive access to get all your questions answered, sign up at our website, portugalstepbystep.com, or just like and subscribe to keep the content coming. See you next time.